Okay, so the Omnivores dilemma, right? Probably a fair number of people in the room have read the book. If you go down to the store and you want to buy a package of meat, it's wrapped in the blue foam and the plastic, chances are there were a lot of petroleum inputs into that meat. And chances are the animals that the meat came from didn't necessarily live the best of lives. So when Michael Pollan was writing the Omnivore's Dilemma, he had a little bit of an experience as a hunter, and it was really interesting to read about that. It's important to point out, hunting certainly is not going to fill the void in our food chain right now, as far as getting food from a really responsible source. But it can supplement your diet and help you develop a connection with the land you wouldn't have otherwise. So when I think about going to the freezer and pulling out a steak, which in my home is always going to be wild game, the idea of having, a steak from one of these steers just doesn't appeal compared to what I could be having from the field. So here we go. To me, this is pretty unappetizing. And it's not because I don't like red meat. In fact, I love a steak about as much as anybody. But like I said, the idea of what went into this meal in terms of petroleum inputs, in terms of quality of life for the animal that was ultimately slaughtered to produce this meat, and in terms of my connection to where this came from, I think I'll let that go in exchange for a venison steak. So where does my food come from? Well, I would like to say that all the food I ate came from nature, but in this day and age, that's pretty unrealistic. The fact of the matter is, however, that much of my food does come from natural sources. We eat quite a few trout. My old office mate Lizzie and I have a couple of deer there that certainly were used to the utmost. Shoshana's first turkey a couple springs ago, we made use of every part of that bird all the way down to boiling the carcass for soup stock when we were done. And that's my pooch Luna with a wood duck. So, obviously we have half a dozen trout, 2 deer, a turkey, and a duck that were killed so that myself and my family could eat these animals. But these animals were killed with respect. They were used to the utmost, and it's pretty hard to argue, at least when you compare them to the source for this steak, that it's not advantageous to go this route. Okay, a little food for thought here. Food familiarity function. We've got the food source on the bottom and the consumer familiarity going on up. Any guesses for the first step? I'm loving it, McDonald's. You have no idea where this came from. Was it an Amazonian rainforest cow that was ultimately slaughtered for that burger? Who knows? Next step up. Going down to the old Piggly Wiggly. Still, probably somewhere in the United States that burger came from, but who knows? Continuing to improve. Whole Foods. There's a big corporate effort to try to help people get things in a more sustainable, eco-friendly manner. Still room for improvement. This is where I'd say we've got our CSAs and our farmers markets coming in. You know the people, at least, who are growing your food. You can go down there, look them in the eye, talk to them about how the weather's been, how their crops are going this year, and have a little bit more of a connection. At the far end of the spectrum, you've got foraging for your own food, growing your own food, raising your own chickens, for example, things where you directly have input into how those food resources are treated and handled, the whole time they're being produced. And this is where I would say we've got hunting and fishing fitting in. You're going out, you know exactly where these food items are coming from, you're developing a personal connection with the land, and in many cases, you're a steward to that land as well. Plenty of us who hunt take an active role in actually managing the landscape to try to benefit the wildlife that we harvest during the hunting season of the year. Another function, the personal connection to the land. I would say pretty much nothing does anything to connect you to the land. Maybe a little bit with the CSA and with the farmers market, because you get to have a direct exchange with the people who are out there farming for you. But when you get into growing your own food, foraging for your own food, or going out and harvesting wildlife resources to feed yourself, you're really developing a personal connection to the land. And if you think about the importance of individuals developing a sense of responsibility for the resource and ultimately becoming the best stewards for the land, having that personal connection and having that appreciation for the resource is absolutely essential. We could do these little line graphs all day, but I just want you to compare a couple of our more common food production venues versus hunting or growing your own food. In terms of revenue generated for conservation, if you're a hunter or fisherman and you're buying hunting and fishing licenses, that money is used to pay people like the conservation officers who are out there protecting the resource. It's used to buy the land that grows the animals that you ultimately end up harvesting. It's money that is used very well in terms of conservation. Whereas, McDonald's doesn't generally cut a percentage of their income to buying up wetlands. If you think about the quality of life for the animal consumed, and for me this is a really important one. I do kill turkeys and I kill deer and grouse and ducks, but they're animals that I do care about. I'm out there with the goal of harvesting a sustainable surplus of the population, and I want those animals to be killed cleanly, and I want those animals to have a good existence up to the point that they're harvested. So for me, having a turkey that's been out there eating grasshoppers all summer long and gone through a winter and had a pretty good quality of life up till the point that it was killed quickly and cleanly sure beats a feedlot steer. In terms of the quality of food, we all, it's pretty much a no-brainer. Wild game tends to be very high in protein relative to fat, organic, artificial hormone-free, free range, as free range as it gets. We talked about the connection to the land. By going out there and actually trying to hunt, if you've never tried hunting before, I know there are all sorts of opinions of what hunting is all about. Some of you might think of hunting as a bunch of rednecks going out with guns and shooting anything that moves and piling up a bunch of critters in the back of the truck and bringing them home. Well, if you're actually going out and trying to harvest a turkey like this, this is Hannah's turkey she got this spring hunting with our program. And how many hours did you spend in the blind that morning?
6 hours.
6 hours of sitting and waiting and calling with the mentor helping sort of shore the ropes. And it's not like you just walk out into the woods and blast the turkey and call it a day. Many people will hunt for several seasons before they get a bird. And plenty of people never get a bird quite like that. That's a really nice one. And then fuel inputs. I talked about the fuel not just to raise the crops that are fed to the steer, but to ship the steer to slaughter and ship the meat to the store. I've got a question mark on here because, plenty of people drive a long ways to go where they hunt. I want this to be an honest discussion today. So, I'll be quick to point out that hunting is not necessarily going to be a low fuel input, especially if you live in an urban center and you're driving out to the place that you're going to ultimately